Hi, this is Dan Korver, pastor here at Dalton Hill Baptist Church. We're a small Baptist church located in Owasso, Oklahoma. We're small enough to know you, but we're big enough to serve you and for you to serve as well. Our vision is to rescue, restore, and return to service. Rescue a non-believer or a believer who has been hurt or is lost, restoring them to Christ in fellowship with other believers with the desire that they in turn will help others along their way.
And like we just heard Linda talking about miracles, and miracles do occur today. And I think it's important, they can be through doctors or they can be divine. It can be either one. It can also be, I think about, it can be through personal faith or it can be through the faith of somebody else. And so I think it's important as we look at it. Today we're going to look basically at four different, what I'd like to call basically the faith of ordinary heroes. Faith of people that caused healing to take place, not the person who was healed, but the faith of other people. So we'll look at it. You'll start the first one, and you'll know them well in the John chapter 2. We may not get to all four of them. If not, we have next week. The first one, Jesus turning the water into wine. Obviously, we know the situation well. If you recall the setting in John chapter 2, verse 1 and 2, is a few days after Jesus called his disciples. They're at a wedding, and his disciples and his mother were invited. And the wedding feast of those days would last about 7 days. So you think about it, in some parts of the world it's still that way. You think about how much food and everything else you would have to plan to try to do all that. So obviously the situation, notice in verse 3, the wine gave out. The mother of Jesus said to Jesus, they have no wine. That's a real social embarrassment. Obviously those of you who have had weddings, I've had to have a few with the daughters, and you're having a meal and you're worried, and all of a sudden more people are showing up, and it's like, oh, are we going to run out of food? And so you're worried. Well, this is what's happened. Obviously they ran out of wine. And obviously in verse 3, the request was to, you think about it, Mary knows who Jesus is, and the implied request is, Jesus do something about it. Well, think about it. Has Jesus done any miracles? No. 30 years of age, but she knows who he is and knows what he can do. That's interesting when you look at Jesus' reply. If you notice, he said, woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour has not yet come. 5 times in John, he says, my hour has not come. 3 times my hour has. So basically what he's saying is, if you go back to, chapter 4, remember, I'm here to do the will and the work of my Father. And so, I have to do what he tells me to do when he tells me to do it, not when you tell me to do it or whatever. She does respond correctly, and notice what she says. His mother said to him, to the servants, whatever he says to you, do it. In other words, he can do it if it's God's will and God's time. Jesus can do it. You do whatever she tells you to do. And I think it's interesting, she submits. And I notice then what you have in verse 6, it's interesting. Now there were 6 water pots set for Jewish customs of purification containing 20 or 30 gallons each. Well, so you have water that's outside, and before they would eat and so on, they'd go and wash. Now, if you remember in chapter 1, you had the law and grace was given. Our law was given through Moses. Grace was coming through Jesus Christ. So here you have. So they know the purification. How many of you would want to drink out of pots that people come in and wash their hands with, or their feet, or whatever? How many of you know, that sounds like something I'd really want to do. Notice then, they know what it is. Jesus says, fill the water pots with water. They filled them up. And he said to them, draw some of it and take it to the head waiter. Now, if you are a servant, how many of you want to take out of that pot and go take it to them? You think about it. They did exactly what Mary said, and now they're doing exactly what Jesus said. How obedient would we be? Can you imagine what happens if the head waiter says, where did this come from? It came from the purification pots. That would go over real well, wouldn't it? So notice then, obviously we know the story well. The head waiter tasted it because it had become wine. It's interesting, the transformation comes from within, and obviously Jesus changed it and didn't know where it came from. And notice he says, normally you would give the good wine first, and as people had had some to drink, you'd give the lesser. In this case, they do just the opposite. If you think about it, when it comes down, you can see it at the end in verse 11. This is the beginning of the signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, manifested his glory, and his disciples believed. So it was God's time, and God does the miracle. Notice, God got the glory, and his disciples obviously believed and started the process that you have. But if you think about it, when you look at some of these questions, when you think about with Jesus, when I think about what they're going through, how many of us would have taken that and taken it to the head waiter? How many of us would have submitted to Jesus? You think there's a lot of different things that's taking place. And it's also interesting, John calls it a sign. There's 7 signs in John, trying to show who Jesus is. His signs. How many of us look out and see and recognize who Jesus is? Does Jesus have compassion for the situation? Yes. And I think it's interesting. So when you look at just the application, by the way, who started the process? Did the family ask for the water or ask for anything? Who asked? Who believed that Jesus could do it?
Mary's mom.
Mary. Who asked for it? Mary. And I think it's interesting when you look at it. By the way, she didn't demand her will. She said, into your will. So notice that's the first one. It's in Canaan. And I would like to look at a second one that takes place in Canaan. We're not doing the miracles necessarily in order. But look over in John chapter 4. We're also in Canaan. And notice verse 43. It says, remember, they had just come they had gone from Jerusalem, and they went through Samaria, and they were there, remember, the meeting of the Samaritan woman. And then in verse 43, and after 2 days he went forth from there into Galilee, and Jesus himself testified that a prophet has no honor in his own country. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans received him, having seen all the things that he did in Jerusalem at the feast. They themselves were also at the feast. So they saw what he did. They're back home. He comes up there. So notice then what happens. That's the setting, the situation. 46. He came therefore again to Cana of Galilee, where he was made to water into wine, and there was a certain royal official whose son was sick in Capernaum. Now, how far is Capernaum from Cana? I think we read these stories when you look. Capernaum's right on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. Canaan would be southeast of it, roughly 20-25 miles. So how long would it take you to get there?
A couple days.
Okay. All right. So if you hear about this, how many of you, with your kids or with you, if you heard somebody could do something, would you travel on a day away? And notice his son was sick, and so he comes. In verse 47, he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea and Galilee. He went to him and was requesting him come down and heal his son, for he's at the point of death. All right, Jesus, you're in Canaan. I want you to come to Capernaum, and I want you to heal my son. Sound like a reasonable request? I mean, how many of us would do the same thing? Make the same request. So notice, I think it's interesting what Jesus then says in 43. Now, I looked at some commentaries. It's always interesting. They'll say, well, we don't know if he was Jewish or if he was Gentile or what. Who asked for signs repeatedly throughout Jesus' ministry?
The Jews.
The Jews did. So notice he says in 48, he said to him, unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe. I believe he's a Jewish official. We're not said exactly what. But he wants a sign. Now, I want you to think about it. What happens if you think about with a lady, I'm assuming he's married, has a wife, and you go off, and the mother is with the child about to die, and you go off to Jesus, and now you leave to go home, but Jesus isn't with you. How well would that be received? Notice what it says, the royal official, sir, come down before my child dies. Remember, Jesus said you need a sign. Notice what he says. Jesus says, go your way, your son lives. 20, 25 miles away. All you guys always want sign. What sign did Jesus give you? Does he give him a sign? Are you going to believe that I can heal and I can do it from a distance and I just did it? If you believe, you're going to do what? Go home. Notice again, the faith of somebody else, the Father, is the one that saved the Son. And notice then, he leaves. The man believed the word of Jesus, spoke to him in verse 50, and he started off. He was now going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son lives. He inquired of them at what hour when he began to get better. They said, yesterday at the 7th hour, the fever left him. The father knew that it was at that hour in which Jesus said to him, your son lives. That time. He himself believed, his whole household. So now a physical healing came, but then also spiritually. So you notice in just these two miracles, faith over nature, so far as turning water into wine. You also had faith over, Jesus had power over distance and on sickness. Both of these take place in Capernaum. You think about it, how many of us would have gone to Jesus? I think a lot of us would have gone to Jesus. We go to Mayo Clinic. We go to MD Anderson. We go to St. Jude's. But how many of us would have left with just the word, he's better? Today, what would we do? We get out our cell phone. Is he better? But notice how much really believe that Jesus, when he gives us the word, we believe. These are two miracles that take place. But again, they're ordinary heroes that take Jesus at his word. But notice, I think there's a couple others. Go back to Mark 2. Now, this is going to be, these two are going to actually take place in Capernaum, which will be right on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. In Mark chapter 1. And notice again, this is faith from ordinary people, but not the person that's healed. And verse 29 of Mark 1, notice it says, immediately after they had come out of the synagogue, they came into the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John at Capernaum. Simon's mother-in-law was lying sick with fever. Okay, notice who all is seeing this. You're in a home, private home, and obviously Peter, James, and John and so on, they were fishing, they were fishermen, they knew each other. And notice, it's interesting what it says. And immediately they spoke to him about it. I think it's interesting that Jesus is interested on our everyday problems we're dealing with, and not just the major thing. This was the healing. This wasn't for everybody else to see. But notice, Jesus then goes in and takes her by the hand in verse 31. Fever left her and she waited on him. If you have been sick in bed with a fever, you don't all of a sudden get better and go start waiting on people. That's obviously proving that she's better. But it's interesting when you look at it. She heals Peter's mother-in-law. Jesus is interested in our everyday troubles. And one of the reasons why I greatly admire what all that you all at church are doing, when you have all the different needs and you put it on the prayer chain, we're asking what? Others to pray. We may not have the faith, but that doesn't mean that others do not have the faith with which to go to pray. And that's interesting. What everyday trial do I need prayer with? How many of us say, well, that's too minor? It wasn't too minor for them to take it to Jesus. And it's important for us to recognize, take our everyday troubles to Jesus. And just like Mary, we want your will to be done in your way. And just like with the Father, am I going to believe Jesus at his word and do it? The fourth one, again, maybe these are faith of ordinary people. And this again is in Capernaum. look over in chapter 2, verse 1. It says, when he had come back to Capernaum several days afterward, it was heard that he was at home. Where's home? You ever noticed that before? Who's home? What's that? Peter. Okay, now I want you to think about this now. You are Peter. You know, you're Peter's home. Okay? Some might have said it's John, because obviously later on it's from there too. But let's just say Peter's home. I think it's probably right, because of chapter 1. You're the owner of the home. How many of you have ever had a lot of people over and guests over and they tear your house apart? And how do you feel about it?
Not very good.
Well, think about it. I think we often, Lord, everything I have is yours. I want to use it for your glory. Do we really believe that? I remember we had a lot of people, the kids were growing up, and they had cross country and everything over. It was amazing how many times they'd leave and there's new stains on the floor that weren't there. There's a piece of furniture that's broken and you don't know how in the world it got broken. Okay, are you there to serve them and want to be a testimony? Or not? So, this is your home, you're Peter, and look what happens in it. Many were gathered together so that there was no longer room, even near the door. Do you think anything might have been happening in the house that's just, going on? So notice what happens. He's speaking to them, and they came bringing to him a paralytic carrying 4 men. Those homes would be flat roofed, and there'd be stairways on the outside leading up. Okay? So Gordon, you and I have been talking earlier. Look what happens in verse 4. Being unable to get him because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and they had dug an opening. They let the paralytic down. Now, how many of you would love to be in the house and everything else is going on, and you hear a chainsaw or a circular saw, and somebody's cutting a hole in your roof? Isn't that what's going on? Lord, what I have is yours, but hey, you're going a little bit far here now. I got to patch this roof. I don't think we really look at what all goes on when taking place. So obviously, notice they let him down in verse 4. Notice what it says in verse 5. Jesus seeing what? Their faith, the 4 men. Their faith, by the way, what's their name?
Doesn't say.
Doesn't say. Remember I said faith of ordinary heroes. Notice what Jesus said, my son, your sins are forgiven. Now why? So in other words, for this particular instance, this young man was paralyzed because of sin. But notice what Jesus is then going to go on. They basically, how easy would it be for me to say to any one of you, Grady, your sins are forgiven? How would you know? But if you're sick because of sin, and I say your sins are forgiven, then to prove it, I'd have to do what? Heal you. Have to heal you. And notice then that's exactly what's going to happen. I can say things, but if you're sick because of sin, and I then forgive your sins, healing takes place. Now notice what happens, and I think it's interesting, because you go on a bit further in verse 9, which is easier to say, the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or say, arise, take up your pallet and walk? Which would you say? I can say one and you don't know. But if I say the other, you'll see it. Notice what he tells the young man now. But in order that you may know the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, I say to you, rise up, take up your pallet, and go home. Does the paralytic now have to have faith? Yes, he does. Which, by the way, how long has he been a paralytic? And you've been laying there that length of time. How well would you be able to get up and walk? Showing the true healing that takes place. It starts off with the faith of his 4 friends. And it comes with the faith of him to rise up and take it up. And notice, obviously, in verse 10, we've never seen anything like this. I'm sure you haven't. But notice when you look at it, how would you feel if you were Peter? Are you glad he's healed? Are you glad, so glad that you don't mind repairing the roof? That's an interesting question. I think also, would you submit to God's will and timing? You know, you have that with the turning the water into wine. How many of us ask Jesus to get involved in our everyday activities? Would I have filled the water pot, and would I have even taken it to Jesus? You know what it was used for? How many of us would have even taken it and done it? The royal, you think of the royal official. Would I have gone to Jesus? Would I have left believing to go home? Or would I have insisted? By the way, isn't that real similar to what we saw last week? They go to Jesus to lead him there, and now Jesus is leading them. He changes the situation. The mother-in-law, is Jesus interested in our everyday activities, our everyday troubles? Obviously, you have the one down the end. According to James, we don't have because what? We don't ask. We don't have because we ask for the wrong reasons. Or we don't have because we don't have faith. We need to make sure that that's not what's taking place. I'll give you an example of faith of others, not your own. I've told you this many times, but Gene and I were married for a long time and didn't believe we'd have children. And my parents just thought, well, they never asked or anything because it wasn't their place to ask. So I finally told my mom, we'd love to have children, but we just can't have them. So Mom said, I'm going to start praying. My sister in Peru hears about it. Well, and obviously in South America, having children is really, really big. So we're going to start praying. Well, then my grandmother, who was living at the time in Iowa, hears about it, and she says, you're going to have a child within a year. Right, Grandma? Right. A year later, Will's born. Okay, it has nothing to do with our faith. It has to do with the faith of other people. Why do we tell other people? We want them praying too, because there comes times when we don't have the faith anymore. We've done it, we prayed, and it didn't work out. Why God waited, I don't know. I like to play with grandkids when I was 50, not when I'm nearly 70. That's a long way down there. But God has His own time. So think about it again. The faith of ordinary people. Isn't that what you and I are? Then how many of us are getting involved in other people's lives to help them find Jesus in their everyday activities?
We'd love for you to come and visit with us and fellowship with us. We're located at 8263 North Owasso Expressway, which is on the east side of Highway 169 North, between 76th and 86th Street North. We have coffee and fellowship from 8:30 to 9 Sundays, followed by Sunday school for all ages from 9 to 9:45, and our Sunday morning worship service is from 10 to 11. We likewise have a Wednesday night service for all ages from 7 to 8. Now may the Lord of peace Himself give you peace at all times, and in every way the Lord be with you all the time.